We are students of the art of play,
And we do this show called The Art of Play.
a show for the players who ask why.
I'm Vi.
And I'm Gaia.
Gaia, when I'm building a party in this game, I live by 3 tenets. And these tenets are Riz, Lie, and Die. Do you know what game we're going to talk about today?
I get the feeling today's episode is going to be about Baldur's Gate 3.
Yes, it is. And I want to tell you that my current party composition in this game is an Oath of Ancients paladin. For listeners who remember me saying that I was playing a druid, I'm no longer playing a druid because I needed another tank. So
You failed a combat bad enough that you changed class.
yeah, I was getting so frustrated with not having another tank that I was like, I guess I'll just be dead. So I'm playing my favorite build, Oath of Ancients paladin. I have a wizard, and I have a cleric, and I have a barbarian. And a lot of the wizard spells are to buff the barbarian and do area of effect. And so I have a really high charisma avatar. So there's the Riz. Usually I play with a rogue, or just because I like his character arc is very fun, but at the moment he's not in the party. So there's the Lie. And if none of that works, I have the party that is built to murder.
If I'm not mistaken, Baldur's Gate 3 has a whole narrative system to generally avoid fights and handle things peacefully. Why are your options seduce, deceive, and kill?
It's because the narrative options, like I really like to play as though I'm the one playing the game, right? And so a lot of
Are you telling me
No.
your real
No.
life tenants are Riz, Lie, Die as well?
No.
Is this how you live
my life? No. It's just the like, I want to be successful and maybe like not fight. We'll just like, everyone will like me and things will go great and that's gonna be fine. And if that isn't true, I'll be like, maybe
How
I'll
often
lie
in real
about it.
life is violence the answer?
Very, very little, I think. Usually.
Is it non-zero?
I don't. You know what? It probably is non-zero.
Okay. I'm glad we got that out of the way on air.
Now, I will talk about this later, but the thing that bothers me most about Baldur's Gate 3, and one of the things that bothers me most about D&D generally, is the combat, right? It's tedious, and it takes too long, and it's just, it ruins the flow of a narrative arc. So that is why I don't like combat, so I've built the best combat party so that combat
be fast. And now you're losing narrative options and being put into combat.
No, I'm not. Because these tenets are in order of priority. It's like if Riz doesn't work and if Lie doesn't work, you're gonna die.
You have really just built the screw you die party.
I have.
Got it.
Yeah, wizard, paladin, barbarian, cleric, die.
Yeah, that is just the screw you die. Okay. So
Anyway,
I feel like there's a main topic for this episode that we really want to be talking about.
Yeah, there
today.
is.
So what might that be?
We're talking about successfully mapping freeform media to video games. So some background on Baldur's Gate 3 is that it's an RPG video game based on the D&D system. And I don't mean that they like kind of borrowed some D&D stuff and it's like D&D-esque. I mean they worked with Wizards of the Coast, and the lore of the game follows canon lore of the D&D world.
So Faerun, Swords Coast, Neverwinter, Waterdeep.
Yes.
Okay.
But this game is set in the same way that Honor Among Thieves is set on the Sword Coast, the D&D film. This is also set in the same place. So
Okay, that's cool.
So you sort of, there's 3 acts of the game. So you start kind of in the wilderness, and then you're kind of like, I mean, spoilers, I guess, if you haven't played Baldur's Gate 3. This whole episode, we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be bringing in my own examples. I didn't text this, but I actually do have examples of turning freeform media into video games as well. That'll come up probably later in the episode. Yep. But as a warning, most of this episode is Baldur's Gate 3. If you don't want to hear about it, don't.
Go play the game because it's excellent.
It's definitely game of the year. Maybe going to be like game of the decade.
Look, it's fantastic. And then you can come back and listen to this episode and hear about what we think about it. And so it's based on the D&D system in the D&D world with all the D&D lore. And as such, we have it's a flexible quest system where like if you eliminate an NPC, it doesn't like implode the game. You don't like accidentally kill somebody. and then find out later that you really, really needed them and you can't go back and fix it. It's not that way. And I think part of it is because it was developed for so long. Like, it was in development for 6 years, and the early access for it was released in early October before the game, in early October of 2020, I think. And then the game came out in August of 2023. And so we have this very loose system, which is kind of like when you're playing D&D at a table, right? You tend to kind of have a looser system about what you should be able to do. And a video game has a very rigid structure, right? So this game faced a lot of challenges with, like, how do you stay true to the D&D game and the spirit of D&D and the lore while being true to player agency within D&D?
Mm-hmm. And we're kind of coming into this episode on the backdrop of our previous one where we talked to a professional game researcher at the University of New Brunswick, Dr. Scott Bateman. If you missed that episode, go back and listen. Good episode. Great guy. And him and I actually were talking about this a little bit before you arrived, Vi, to do that recording. And we're talking about what can you do successfully to transform other media into video games and to actually translate what people want. And I think we're going to get to the heart of that as we go through the episode, as we go through kind of your notes and your plan that you have for it.
Yeah.
So I'll leave this to you for your organization. How would you like to begin?
Well, I'm so interested in what Scott had to say now that you've brought him back into the discussion.
I'll bring this up a little bit later. Him and I talked a lot about, like, card games and how we can turn card games into video games and stuff like that. So I'll bring that in a little bit later.
Well, so there's an expectation to manage, I think, with this game, which is why a lot of the early access stuff was so successful. But when you already have a fan base who are really interested in the game, and you want them to be involved in the game, and you want to make, Baldur's Gate 3 successful, you have to kind of reconcile some of their expectations. And I think releasing it 3 years in advance with early access was part of that, right? Because you got a lot of fans who got to play through the first act a little bit.
Every D&D player is such a tryhard who would love to do that.
Yeah. And we say that affectionately. I would have played early access. Yes. I would have played early access had I known? Had I had the means?
Had it, like, reached you.
Yeah. At the time, I definitely would have done it. So there's 3 things I want to talk about. This game has been successful for sort of 3 reasons. So there's that development that's true to lore and true to the game that it's based on. There is a lot to be said for the production value and the attention to detail, and that early release and beta testing. Gaia, what do you expect from a game that's based on D&D?
I would expect a lot of options, first and foremost. What defines my D&D games is often that there's a main plot, and I'm not able to fully dissolve that plot, to move away from it, but that how I go through that plot is really up to me, and the route that I take and what I do and my actions are all my own. I also think there's going to be a degree of randomness quite often. I expect to have, like, luck of the draw in that form. Like, it all depends on the dice. Like, it all depends on my rolls. And can I build myself around that? Can I play around the crit range, to use a Pokemon term of all things? Whoa. Right? Like, so I expect a mixture of I have agency first and foremost and can choose how to go about the adventure. And I expect randomness as a means of success and fail, and the ability to account for that randomness in the decisions that I make.
I often think of D&D as like a bargaining between the DM and players on things that you should be able to do.
My players are not allowed to bargain with me.
Well, there's some like kind of sandbox elements to it, right?
I let one of my players be a necromancer hamster. There was no bargaining past that point. They got what they wanted. Yeah. Now I get what I want. And I was killing that hamster.
Yeah. Well, so there's that sandbox element, and there's improvisation that happens at the table in narrative structure, right? Okay, you don't know what your player is going to say, what they're going to want to do. But again, and even stuff like fudging rolls and improvising, is kind of the pitfall for why this is a challenge to do well. And I want to put in this quote from a Polygon article, which was, "This game is a masterpiece that's built on a bad tabletop game." Which which is, you're making so many faces.
That is such a good quote.
Isn't it such a good quote?
That is such a good quote. You said you were going to quote Polygon. I was like, that's the wrong choice. And then
No.
you'd say the quote. No, that's the right choice.
No, it's the right choice. Because, yeah, like, D&D has a lot of issues. Like, we've talked about how D&D is based on, like, simulating Civil War events and, right, is kind of a war-based game, right? And even in our personal conversations about DMing games, like, you lose narrative velocity as soon as you engage in combat, right? It's instant. We just had a conversation with this. You did a 3-session one-shot where it was like narrative, a combat session, because it takes like 3 hours to get through a fight.
It wasn't even meant to be a combat session. That was meant to be 1 hour, and it took 4 hours for a single fight.
Yes, because there's so many decisions and things that, like, there's so many little things.
My party spent 45 minutes in front of the gates debating what to do, and then I just attacked them.
Yeah. You know, and there's things like that, and then and so that becomes really challenging to do as a video game, and I do think that's a place where Baldur's Gate falls short. Is that, like, I want to progress narrative, and I'd really love for that to be, you know, the thing that I'm engaging with the most. And then I run into situations where it's like, you have to kill this guy. You have to engage in this, like, lengthy combat. Anyway, so it butts heads with D&D in the same way that my experience with D&D does, where, like, the narrative tends to outshine the tedious combat in, like, some serious ways. And, like, Eurogamer says that even when the tiniest environmental action feels like a roleplay choice, like, does sneaking past something, we talked about this, does sneaking past something objectionable mean implicitly allowing it? You play...
Are you at fault as a spectator?
Are you at fault? And the thing is the way that Baldur's Gate 3 gets around the, like, sandbox element of D&D is that it frames the game as more of, like, a series of scenes and stages, right? You do this thing and you make some choices, and those choices have meaning and weight, right? Do you side with this person? Do you pretend to side with this person, right? Just to make this next thing easier? Do you betray them later, right? Those are all choices that you can make. And in my experience, those things and, like, the exploration elements of Baldur's Gate 3 are really strong in the first act. And they fall apart a little bit in the next 2 acts. And I think part of it is because they don't, like, those choices have meaning and weight. But when you start from such a broad base of so many different choices and different options, and then you have to narrow it to get to that, like, plot moment at the very end, you're going to lose some of that feeling of agency, just because of the way that the game is structured and the way that it has to be structured. So what they've done really well is taken something that feels freeform and starts from a place of, like, more exploration to get to somewhere that's specific, right? Like you're saying, like, there's one overarching plot, but as you approach the overarching plot, you're going to lose some of that, like,
yeah, well, you've made a lot of the decisions by then.
Yeah.
Like, I think back to my main D&D game in this, where my players started off getting a mission in Neverwinter to be like, there's things going on. We're nearing a civil war, and we heard news of a demon that could be influencing things. Go figure it out. Mm-hmm. And my players were like, okay, we'll go to the main city where the last adventuring party who took this quest, who disappeared, were last seen. Mm-hmm. Start there. And I narrate it, and they're like, oh, the Civil War battle has begun, and it was really not supposed to happen now. What did they do? And they go to the battle, and then they decide to raid the camp of the Empire that hired them to steal their communication devices, to call off the battle because the Empire attacked the other side. And I was like, okay, that was a weird choice, but I vibe with it.
Yeah.
And then they made it to that demon thing, which was their entire quest, because, like, that their whole thing was breaking that down. And I stuck them in an arena and was like, yeah, you're trapped here now.
Yeah.
Good luck. And then you fight the boss afterwards. And we had, like, a whole, like, player sacrifice moment at the end where, like, they prayed to their god to take down this demon. The god was, like, a greater deity.
Yeah.
And the god was like, would you be willing to sacrifice yourself? And the player immediately said yes and just got beamed.
Yeah, I mean, but those are the things that you can't do in a video game, right? Like, a video game in itself, like, it's coded by a computer, right? It's made to make specific choices, right? So you can't just type in dialogue into this game and hope for the best, right? Like, there are dialogue options, and you need to sort of be cognizant of the fact that you're playing a video game. So it does it really well. And Guy, have you watched any like playthroughs of this? Have you?
No, I've not seen anything. I'm about to get spoiled so much for this game that I'm planning on playing later.
Okay.
You know, we gave a spoiler warning if you don't want spoilers to get out. I could have just got up and left.
Yeah, I have to do this whole episode by myself.
Good luck.
Thank you. I mean, I could talk about Baldur's Gate 3 all day. I'm not sure how coherent a lot of it would be, and I think it's because of this next reason. The production value and attention to detail. This is a game that was developed by Larian Studios, which is an independent studio, even though they're quite big. They were responsible for the Divinity games, which I don't know if you ever played.
I've played 2 hours of Divinity Original Sin, I want to say.
Yeah.
Is that the game? Yeah. About 2 hours.
So they were responsible for developing that. So
okay, so like a studio that knows what they're doing and has a history.
Yeah, exactly. So they approached Wizards of the Coast and they said, "Can we please make Baldur's Gate 3?" And Wizards of the Coast said, "Oh, we're not really sure, probably not." And so they went away and they made some other stuff and they worked on different projects. And then Wizards of the Coast went back to them and said, "Actually, do you want to make Baldur's Gate 3?" And they went, "Yes, we do want to make it." And if you will go watch like some of the behind the scenes, like stuff on YouTube from Larian, you can tell how passionate and like how much fun the developers had making this game. And they placed a lot of emphasis on the cinematics and the characters of this game. How many NPCs do you think are in a normal game? Not a Baldur's Gate 3. Oh gosh, if you've got numbers for both of them, give them.
Okay, for a normal video game, I'm thinking back to like Persona 5 or other main adventure games. Yeah. I'm going to say like I think the max I could experience is 200, but I think like 70 to 100 is a very normal number of interactable characters that aren't like one-liners.
How many of those do you think are voice acted?
Oh, like 10. Sure. And then like in D&D, well, they're all technically voice acted in D&D by one guy.
Is it me?
Yeah. Usually my average D&D games pull 20 to 30 NPCs before the players start forgetting who they've met.
Sure.
A one-shot will usually pull about 5 to 10.
Baldur's Gate 3 voice acted every single NPC and in motion capture for every single one.
Oh my God.
Every single one.
How many?
Okay, I want to tell you that this includes major NPCs, like the people you have in your party, as well as any animal that you can talk to. Because speak with animals is an option for so many players that every animal can be spoken with.
Oh my God.
Seriously, every single one. Okay, so they had the budget and the time to do this really, really well. And that's why part of this shines, right? Is that every character feels very real and the world feels real because the cinematics are done well. You know, when you approach, things as your character, those scenes feel very real. And within them, your dialogue options have choices, right? You make rolls, you make persuasion rolls within a conversation to try to sway somebody, and they respond to it within the conversation. That has an outcome that has a real effect, right? It's not just like, oh, let me say the silly thing because I know that this dialogue is going to proceed, in whatever way because it doesn't matter what I say. No, it matters. You're going to make a roll on it. You're going to hope for the best.
You say the wrong line, you get smited.
Yeah. It's stuff like that of like, all right, we're going to fight now, right? And it's like, oh, shoot, no, I wanted to like persuade this person. You fail the persuasion roll and they're like, well, sucks to be you, I guess. But they also do, because Lorien understands that you don't have a benevolent DM, right? You're playing with a computer. They've introduced some things into this game to make it feel a little bit like you do have a DM. Stuff like karmic dice. Whereas if you roll really, really bad for a while, it kind of tips the balance back in your favor. It's like, okay, now some good rolls.
Some bonus dice.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, not quite bonus dice. You don't really see this mechanic, but like, okay, this next roll is going to be a little bit good. It's not pure random, which you can turn off if you really wanted to play it pure random.
But that's also like just a good game design principle because I have players who in my D&D games have gotten genuinely very frustrated because their rolls are bad.
Yeah.
And like, there's a reason why I don't show my players my rolls anymore because 90% of my rolls are fudged. Like I do not show them the results because I just tell them what I want.
Yeah, you're more interested in the narrative than what the dice
They're way more about them
said.
having fun. I do not care about controlling 17 enemies in a single piece of combat. Like I'm not invested in that. I'm invested in them having fun.
Exactly. So they understood that when they were making the game, right? These are people who really enjoy D&D, and then they're like, oh, we get to make the D&D game. Yay! So they've done really good stuff like that, and that shows up in some of these character decisions too, right? Where if you try to persuade someone, they give you like a second chance to just be like, do you want to try a different tactic? Like, do you want to see if you can sway this a different way? Do you want to try that same tactic again before making the consequence?
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And I can't believe you haven't seen videos of this.
I've been avoiding videos.
Fair enough.
Like I've chosen not to watch them.
Okay. Because some of the voice acting is stellar.
Okay, I have seen that one scene with the Drider, which is like probably the one scene that does not accurately represent the game.
Yeah, that's extremely fair. But I find myself not skipping through dialogue because I want to hear the voice actor performances, which is so different from any other video game.
Bro, I didn't even do that in Persona.
Right? Like, there is stuff like Skyward Sword, I did it all the time, right? Where I would just skip dialogue. I was just like, get over it, right? But with Baldur's Gate 3, I don't. I'm like, oh no, I want to hear what this person is going to say. I want to hear the choice they make.
Show me your wares.
Exactly. It's so good. But every character, I'm like casting Speak with Animals when I know it's not really going to help me because I really want to know what that Displacer Beast has to say.
You know what? Fair enough.
Right? Like, it's just like once you know that that's an option, it's like, oh, I'm going to go do that.
It's always an option.
It's always an option.
Always talk to the animal. I have to imagine the designers were like, we cannot put very many animals in this game because we will suffer.
Man, there's animals all over the place. It's great.
God.
Yeah, like
they have to have a system for deciding which animals get the same voices, and like if a voice already been played, it doesn't get played again, kind of thing.
There's got to be. It's like again, spoilers. I'm in this like underground shrine, sort of temple to one of the goddesses. And there are rats there, and there's like a weird amount of them. And so I'm like, oh, I want to talk to these rats and see what's up. And the game's like, these rats seem different. And you can roll animal handling to be like, what's different about them? Or you can roll insight to be like, why do I feel like they look different? And I haven't rolled well enough to like have a good answer on that, but I have been able to speak with them, and they're telling me that I'm unworthy and not allowed to be in the temple, and calling me names and stuff. And they're all of the rats are voice acted by the same person.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
It's like I'm not going to stand here and have an extended conversation with these rats. So the game does guide you in some way of like, you don't need to waste time with this. It's not important. These guys are all going to tell you the same thing, and it's just like, yeah, it's weird.
Rats. We are the rats.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Anyway, so but even like the landscape and the environments that you play in feel rich, and they do environmental storytelling really, really well, right? So even if you don't roll really well in your insight, you can kind of figure out that the place that you are has a story and a history, which I think is really well done. And again, everything's motion captured. Like, there's also an element to this game of like the romance of all of these characters is so popular.
Don't get me started. I have an artist friend who's been promising to draw a romance with Asterion for so long. And they have not yet, and it's become a running joke that they just promise the Asterion art every time I ask them to do something and they can't.
Yeah, they're like, I'm working on something.
They're like, busy. Oh, it's the Asterion art. I'm like, no, I need you to do this task.
No, anyway, so that's really popular, right? Like the people that you are interested in, you can be interested in, with explicit outcomes, and I think maybe that's all I'll say about that. Anyway, all of those choices are really well made, and they're thought out and they're careful, which again is what happens when you give a studio that is talented the time and resources to do a game right. So when this game was released, there wasn't any game-breaking things, right? This wasn't a AAA release where, it was like, oh gosh, and it doesn't work because
Day 1 3.5 gigabyte patch.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't anything like that. But it was because I think that they had this early release, they had beta testing, they were getting good responses from people and implementing them so that the patches that come out are like, I keep glitching through the environment here and I can't revive this character, and, can we fix that, right? And so they've been responsive, which has been a really important part of their success. And that's kind of all I had to say about that, because those three things together make this game really successful. But I do want to talk about more generally what it means to take like freeform media to games and video games generally. Because D&D has been adapted to board games and all sorts of things. but it's not
Is
just
D&D
D&D.
not technically a board game?
I don't want to have this conversation.
Again,
I feel like
it's like a third time.
It is, but it isn't. You don't have to have a board game to play this game.
Me loading up Roll20 even when we're playing online.
Me doing combat fully in the Mindscape.
Okay, but like, there's a reason why I've chosen not to do that.
My reason is I think it's cool and I like it.
I think it's cool, and I realize every point where if I stop focusing for a moment, I have no clue what's going on, so I don't do that for my players.
Yes, but I'm also a very visual person, so
That's fair.
so it's in my brain. I'm like, this makes a lot of sense.
What's that condition where you can't picture things in your head? Aphasia?
Sure.
Yeah, everyone with aphasia at your table crying.
Crying, yeah.
Actually crying.
Me like being like placing dice and being like, that's where you all are, and then he's over there. Figure it out.
That works. See,
Yeah.
that's a map, technically.
Sort of. But again, you don't have to do that to play a game. Not a board game.
So okay, it's a mind game.
Yes. Yeah, it's a tabletop mind game.
Tabletop mind game.
Yeah.
Okay. So there is the topic of adapting other media to video games in general that is very interesting. And you've kind of talked about some of the main principles for why that could be so successful, such as being given the appropriate time and resources to figure out how you should go about it.
It's so huge. Like, and I think part of it too is because they had to be true to the lore, right?
Mm-hmm.
If Wizards of the Coast is saying you're going to make a D&D game,
You have
right?
one shot.
You have to do it right. You know, and it has to feel like D&D. You have to be true to that, which means that it has to be done right.
Yeah.
And they met with like people from Wizards of the Coast all the time, like consistently, to be like, does this make sense? Does this work? Can we adapt these spells? But also like making changes to the freeform media, you know, making changes to D&D to
Having
make it
creative
more
liberty.
play.
Yeah.
Like they've done stuff like you get 2 short rests before every long rest.
That's kind of how the average D&D game goes, yeah.
Yeah.
I just don't give my players short rest anymore.
Yeah,
I removed them as a system.
They're so useful in Baldur's Gate 3.
Yeah.
Because I don't have to go to camp and rest and use, because you actually have to use resources. Like all of the like carrots that you've been collecting, you have to spend to take a long rest. Like that's how that works. You can't just long rest whenever you want. So it's resource based. So those short rests become really important because that's where you get like most of your hit points back.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and especially for like characters who are playing like warlocks and monks and stuff who get stuff back on short rests.
Yeah.
Or
But
sorcerers?
yes, sorcerers do too. And like wizards do. But that also kind of hits that important thing of any game that we're making, when given more time and resources, will often be improved, especially with the current game model that is very short-term, snappy, get the game out, see what people think, and fix it from there.
Yeah,
go for it.
They're not really beholden to the shareholder, like, let's make everything, you know, microtransactions because that's going to put lots of money on the table.
They still probably have shareholders, but those shareholders are thinking, we have a brand to uphold.
Yeah.
And I think that's something unique about the converting from one media to another aspect, where you have 2 options. Join the history of shovelware and get slammed into the dirt, or put a lot of time and energy to make something. Like you can't go halfway without just producing shovelware, so you either have to go all in or not at all.
Yeah. And that's the thing. They have chosen the all-in option and made
a very successful game.
One of the best games that I have ever played.
Easy.
Yeah.
And we kind of see this in the adapting from other genres and other media as well over to video games. I think the best example of success in mapping from other, like from tabletop games into video games, is actually the whole card game genre. Like, let me ask you, do you know what Hearthstone is?
I've heard it.
So Hearthstone is one of the most popular games of all time. Just full stop, like top 10 in terms of popularity. And it's just a card game you play on your phone or on your computer. And it's fun. People love it. Like, it's genuinely a good game. Microtransaction hellhole in some ways, but a fun card game. And for a long time, and I think even to this day, there is no physical equivalent. It is just a card game on your computer. And you play with cards. You have a hand of cards and a deck of cards. And that's it. That's how it works. It's kind of like Magic the Gathering in some ways, but still, like, it is very different than Magic the Gathering, based on similar universes, though. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that's one of the most popular games. I think about, like, Slay the Spire, a game that took cards and was like, what if you are playing a roguelike and the cards determine your attacks and your abilities and how you play? Like, a lot of games use cards now, and cards have been adapted well as a mechanic that people understand and can use very easily in video games as well. And it comes back down to a lot of the principles you've said before, staying true to the medium, emulating what works from the medium, and developing and editing the things that generally failed, right? They kept roles in Baldur's Gate because people enjoyed it. That was interesting, and it shows the randomness to you. Most games have randomness done as effectively a dice roll with some number of sides. Like, that's just how randomness works, right?
Yeah, but Baldur's Gate 3 shows it to you because it's inherent to the media.
It's inherent to D&D, yeah.
Inspired by, yeah.
And we see a lot of games that are successful from adapting from one media to another, of doing exactly that, of pulling in the things that work. With card games, having a hand that has randomness and certain effects, that like these cards that you play that are fixed static things, and deck builders. Like, deck builders is that's its own genre. Deck builder is just its own genre option on Steam.
Yeah.
Like, completely on its own, which is wonderful, right? And like, I love that. And like, I've played some games like Twilight Struggle, which is a wonderful Cold War simulation board game where you can't have the war become hot. Like, you can't start thermonuclear war, but you have to play as the US or the Soviet Union and build your influence around the map. And from what I can tell, like, they built a video game version of it, and it's just the board game but better, because like, you don't need to worry about the tiles or where you put things. Like, they took all the fun and was like, but what if you don't have to worry about like the micromanagement of all these little pieces? Yeah. It was great. I loved it. I even played one board game that was like a hexagonal base, move your characters through the board. Your goal is to build up one of 4 stats and either kill the king, save the king, and defeat everybody else, or I can't remember the other 2 endings, in the middle to become the new king of the land. And they were all anthropomorphic animal characters. The game's called Armello. I stopped playing it because I gamer rage too hard in that game now, but that's a different story. But the amazing thing is every time I play that game, I'm like, this would make a good board game, but here are the things that would need to be fixed to be a board game. And my friend who like is deep in the Armello lore is like, well, actually, they wanted to make a board game before they realized that half of these mechanics aren't a board game, like don't work in board games, despite the fact that it's just a board game with turns and dice and like certain behavior. Like, it's just a board game, but it doesn't translate into the board well.
Do you know what's funny is so there's D&D properly, right? D&D books and whatever, Player's Handbook, 5th edition. And then in the timeline leading up to Baldur's Gate 3, they made Baldur's Gate, I think it's also 3, but it's like Descent into Avernus. It's supposed to be like so there's D&D lore ends, and then there's the board game to bridge the gap, and then there's Baldur's Gate 3, which now adds on to the existing lore of the D&D world. And then right before the Baldur's Gate 3 release, Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves came out. I think part of it is just that like D&D is at like the most popular it might ever have been. Yeah.
Just a note for our listeners, by the way, Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus is a 5th edition module for D&D for the TTRPG, like for the board game. This isn't a video game or a movie. This is this is a campaign.
It's a physical game.
This is a campaign for D&D leading into the Baldur's Gate universe.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you could play it in the anticipation of it.
It's described as Dungeons & Dragons meets Mad Max Fury Road, and that is the best review I've ever read.
I kind of want to play it.
It's on the Wikipedia page.
That sounds really good, actually. There's a line that I found from a Eurogamer article just about D&D generally that I thought is so good. It just, D&D has released an escape velocity from the niche of nerd culture.
Oh, so it's Star Trek.
It's so good. It's just like, yes, it has. That's just what's happened. Like, it's become kind of normalized. Like, it's not just a thing that stats nerds do in their basements anymore.
Sorry, I'm still reading about that campaign book, and it has an appendix that is 50 pages long at the end that is just focused on Baldur's Gate as a location for if you want to run your own campaign there. 50 pages.
That kind of rules.
In an appendix.
I like it.
That's a lot.
I'm into it.
Okay.
Yeah, I want it.
The players also have the option of wading into a blood war. What?
Huh?
Hey,
Gaia, I think we should play this.
Are you going to go buy this book?
Yeah, I am. Can you send me the link? I'm going to buy it.
On it.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Keep talking. I'll send it to you.
Yeah. I think that Baldur's Gate 3 really is a masterclass in how we adapt things that people love, because I think that's huge here. How do you do that well while still understanding the limitations of the product that you're making? And I will say that the combat and how some of your choices, you kind of get railroaded occasionally just because, like, you can't choose not to fight the big bad evil guy because that's the point of the plot, right? You can't just go off and do something else because that's not what the game is built on. But everything within the scenes, the choices that you make, everything is very well done.
Sir, I'm still looking up the book. I have found it. It is at our local store.
Is it?
It should be. I don't know if they have it in stock at the moment, but it's listed as an official store that carries it on the site.
That's very cool. Okay.
Okay. Continuing back in, I did miss your last statement while I was looking this up.
Oh dear. I was just saying that Baldur's Gate 3 is very, very good, and I'm disappointed that you haven't played it.
I plan on it. I plan on playing it. It's expensive.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's an expensive game.
I expect that it will go on sale before Christmas.
So here's a question that I have for you then, kind of as part of this episode.
Yeah.
Are there other games that feel like they go from some non-video game media into video game media that you feel have done either really well or really poorly?
Anything adapted from a book or from a movie. I'm going to talk like
good or bad?
The Witcher 3.
Good.
Good.
Barbie.
What?
Bad.
I'm sorry, Barbie movie to Barbie game?
Yeah, that's a thing. Barbie was notorious for being shovelware.
Well, yeah, but not the most recent Barbie.
Well, they haven't made one yet.
I mean, that would be...
Like, we both
that
know
would
they will.
kind of be good.
The new Spider-Man game is, I guess, based on the movies as well, and it's really good.
I think anything that has really rich lore that you pay attention to.
Anything that has a production budget.
Yeah.
Because I've mentioned this before, and I want to think back to back in the day on the DS, on the Wii. It's just a Nintendo problem, to be quite honest. And then the Xbox Kinect, because we've talked about motion controls, and that is such an easy thing to shovel trash onto.
Some big, strong opinions over there.
A lot of games came out back in those days of the late 2000s, early 2010s. That was just shovelware, just these low-budget, quick-to-make, low-quality games meant to just steal the hype from a movie.
Yeah.
And some people have asked, why was that a thing?
Well,
why was
really
shovelware a thing?
easy to make content for kids from something they already like.
Yeah, and you have to think about this from what happened on the production side, though, to cause this. And I've had this discussion, I've looked into it, and generally what happened was these publishers halfway into making a movie, and remember the timeline for a movie is 2 to 3 years, right? So they're a year in, they reach out to a bunch of game studios trying to figure out who could make a game for the movie that's cheapest, that would come out like a month before the movie's release with minimal information about the movie so they don't spoil it.
Yeah.
So they know nothing. They're given the lowest possible budget because it's the cheapest option. They have to make the game in under a year usually.
Yeah.
On something they don't know.
Yeah.
And then we got shovelware games. Yeah. Shovelware movie tie-in games. And they were bad. They were bad because they had no choice but to be bad.
So how do you avoid taking something and making shovelware? What steps do you take to not do that?
Well, I think there's one very easy step, and that's don't pitch it to the lowest bidder.
Yeah.
Instead, pick a company that can do well. Because, like, no movie company has an in-house game studio, except maybe Marvel, who usually just sells their rights to Disney. Well, I guess now Disney owns Marvel, so not anymore. But, for a while, that was a thing, right? DC does it too. So step one really is just, you need to give a budget to your company, and you need to give them time. We talked about this before. In game development patterns, one of the biggest problems that we see is that they're like, oh yeah, this game should take 7 years to make. You have, let me check, 3.
Yeah.
Right? Looking at anything that's not GTA, because GTA took forever. Let's not lie here. Like GTA took a while, but a lot of games come out very buggy, very full of holes, missing lore, missing updates, missing expansions, and they have to get fixed as time goes on. Looking at EA in particular, right?
Yeah, any of those games that come out and then you need to download a whole bunch of packages to make them playable.
Oh,
that is wild to me. It's like releasing a book without the cover and you're missing key chapters.
It's like releasing a book with only the cover, to be honest.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's it. You're releasing the cover, and that's a huge problem. It's short timelines, bad working conditions, minimal budget, and let's be quite honest here. Not every movie has enough content to make a full game.
Yeah.
So we talked about this in our interview with Scott Bateman in our previous episode, that a movie is 2 to 3 hours, right? He said 90 minutes to 3 hours. 2 to 3 hours is more the standard now, leaning into 4,
yeah,
right? A book will take you, if you're an avid reader, a day or two, and you can get through most standard fiction books. Up to a week if you're not
I was gonna say not the chunky, not my reading pile.
Not
I'm
the pile that you showed me.
I'm looking at you, Brandon Sanderson.
Yeah. Except for him, who you will take longer to read his works.
Yeah.
Like, like a few days to a week is reasonable. And then with a video game, like, you laugh at someone who hasn't put in over 100 hours.
You spend a lot of time, like, investing in these games.
Undertale is a 21-hour commitment. Specifically.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so here's the thing. Can you beat Undertale in 5 hours? Yes. Have I beat Undertale in 5 hours? Yes. I've put 60 hours into that game. Like, I love Undertale. Like, 21 hours, 100% Undertale. All the runs, right? Full true pacifist and genocide, which is a wild word to say.
When you're making a game that people are paying, like $80 for, they're expecting to not play for 20 hours. They're expecting put
content.
Hundreds of hours in.
And that's the problem, because a lot of movies don't have hundreds of hours of content, right? I would say, like, I see some movie tie-ins are like, this is Spider-Man 2, the game. And that, let's be fair, when that came out on the PS2, it was a very good game. It was a very good game because all people would do is swing between buildings in New York, and that was
they were
fun.
like,
it was one fun mechanic, but there was not enough lore for that one movie.
For sure.
Like, I could not make an even 20-hour game out of that movie. Like, it's just not going to happen.
And then in comparison, like Baldur's Gate 3, I saw it the other day, which made me feel really bad about how slow I'm playing through it. It was like Act 1 is supposed to be like 24 hours of play or something like that.
You're at 40?
Yeah, and I'm at 40, and I'm in the beginning stages of Act 2. That's my that's the exploration bug of like every corner I'm gonna go look at stuff.
Baldur's Gate 2. Do you know when Baldur's Gate 2 came out?
Like early 2000s, right?
September 21st, 2000.
Yeah.
I was not a year old when that came out.
And this is...
I'm 23 and Baldur's Gate 3 just came out. So let's put into perspective how long it's been as well. They have 23 years
of lore
that they can build off of.
Yeah.
Like, what version of D&D was that?
In what?
What version of D&D was active in the year 2000?
Got like third, probably.
Like
a third would have been fresh or was about to be released.
Version history of Dungeons and Dragons. Can I have a chart, Wikipedia?
Because like late 2010s would have been fourth, because that was the Pathfinder time.
True, that's correct. Yes. Timeline. Here we go. In the year 2000, that is the year third edition came out.
Oh, I win.
You win.
I win.
I was going to say AD&D.
No.
And AD&D was still active then, because we're talking like that was the year, right?
Yes.
Fourth edition would come out in 2008, and then fourth edition with the Essentials came out in 2010, and that's a really funny sentence.
Yeah, so this game has two and a half versions of D&D to account for.
AD&D had a first and a second edition. The Dungeons and
it did.
D&D Basic was not first edition. That's pre-first edition.
Yeah.
AD&D is first and second?
Yes.
Oh.
You should read, and anybody listening to this should read Of Dice and Men if you're interested in D&D.
You mentioned that a lot. Yeah, I should read that.
It's just a good book. It's just like, it's just a good history on like, how did we get here? But it doesn't cover the D&D Renaissance, which I think is super interesting. Yeah.
But yeah, so for converting other media from other things and bringing them over to video games, some of the important factors are: is there enough content to actually make something? Like fundamentally, is there just enough content to make? And secondarily, do you have the time and budget to produce it?
Yeah. Do you have 60 hours worth of content?
Yeah.
Or more. Do you have enough for players? Or if you're selling
a cheaper game to be a tie-in, maybe 20, 25 hours.
Depending on how long you want that game.
For a lore-heavy game, like a story game.
Yeah, I think the key thing here is if you're looking at producing a story-heavy game, there has to be story to it.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's part of my qualm right now with some like fantasy books that I've seen come out and are very popular, is there isn't that like thought about how deep lore has to be for people's actions to have meaning. Where there's just a lot of books where I'm like, nothing is happening in this book and it's 900 pages.
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, I'm 2 chapters in, I still don't know anything about the world. I just know that these people have gone to these places. nothing else.
That's
right?
all you know.
Or they're like, there was a war and there's 2 kingdoms. Moving on.
Or something wild is that we haven't had a Game of the Year quality game come out for one of the most expensive universes of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
There's been good Lord of the Rings games, don't get me wrong, but no, like, Baldur's Gate 3 level Lord of the Rings.
I mean, somebody should do that.
The Lego Lord of the Rings was really good. But come on, it's Lego.
Actually, Lego Lord of the Rings.
That's something that I want to talk about quickly as well.
Sure.
Like, we're in our last 10 minutes of the episode, and this is something big that I think needs to be mentioned. Lego has a very long track history of taking popular movies and franchises that otherwise making games might be difficult and just making out-of-the-park banger games.
Yeah.
Like, a long history of this. And I feel like that has to be acknowledged because how does Lego do it?
I think Lego knows what people enjoy playing with.
Well, they know what makes a good Lego game. And they know how to take a good story and put it into a Lego game. You want to destroy things, you want to build things and see like Lego pieces everywhere. You want like dialogue that's really just them looking at each other weirdly, and that's mostly it, right? You want the story watered down a little bit, and you want to kind of play around in the universe in a creative way. That's what Lego's good for. Lego also puts together the budget and the time for these games.
I think a really good, like if you could boil down all of Lego games' essence to one character, Lego Batman.
Oh my gosh.
No. It's seriously like, okay, it is the Batman lore. We get it, right?
Yeah.
But we put it into something that is really fun, right? This character who's like kind of incompetent but like sassy, right? Totally cool. And then given a voice actor room to play with it, like that's Baldur's Gate 3 right there.
And Lego also takes a lot of creative liberties. When there's something in the universe that does not work with Lego, they will adapt it in such a way that it can. And that's a very important feature about Lego. I feel like Lego actually has this down to a science for how to convert other media into a video game that's fun. And it's because Lego is fun. You're coming for the mixture of Lego and the media, and they built a brand that was very successful around that in the video game sphere. Lego Batman is one of the best examples, but many people I know will talk about their favorite Lego game being Lego Star Wars or Lego Lord of the Rings, right? Both amazing Lego games. I'm pretty sure there were other Lego DC tie-ins as well. I can't remember any at the moment, but I know there was more than just Lego Batman.
Right? I'm just thinking about, like, maybe this episode should just be Lego games and then Baldur's Gate 3, like, those two things together being this, like, perfect mesh of, like, we have the lore and we know what makes a game playable.
Yeah.
Here's
it comes
together.
down to 3 things. Time, money, because let's be honest, money is a huge factor.
Yeah, this game had a budget of, like, $25 million.
Which is not a lot in the game industry.
Yeah, but still, like...
Yeah.
Quite a bit.
But it's time, money, and something to build on, because when you're building from other media, you are not at the liberty of making your own story, so what you do have has to be sufficient, and that's fundamentally important, right? And Lego got it down, Baldur's Gate got it down, the Spider-Man games got it down, the Batman games, the Arkham games have it down, right? Games that have a comic book history to pull from tend to do quite well. Who would have thought?
Again,
right?
the big lore.
The big lore. Many different things and references and styles and changes and like abilities and environments. They're all important. Things that the game needs, right? And like you can look at it the other way of a lot of successful adaptations from video games into books and other media come from games with a lot of lore that are very interesting. Like the anime for Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney is great. Right? It's not like the world's best anime, but it's fun.
But
it's
for
enjoyable.
A video game?
It's good.
Yeah.
Right? And what is it? The manga for Persona is really good.
Yeah. I think also something that makes this game very good is like it is working at the height of what is useful right now.
Yes.
Right? Like the graphics are fantastic. Right?
Oh, yeah.
But they're not the selling point of the game. Right? The
game
game is good because the game is great.
You need to be built on fundamentally good mechanics.
Yeah.
But yes, good visuals and good audio are required too.
Yeah, and I think like another thing that's been successful in the popularity of Baldur's Gate 3 is how good those things look when you share them independent of the gameplay.
Yeah.
Right? When you share just like, oh, look at this little dialogue thing that I unlocked, that's great. Right?
Oh,
there's millions of recorded words for this game.
Oh my, I can imagine.
Millions.
And like, that's the thing. When I was talking about going from video games to other media as well, one of the big points where that transition has failed is like, do you remember have you watched the original Mario movie?
No.
Don't. Have you seen any of the Mortal Kombat movies or the Final Fantasy movies?
Oh, no, I haven't. No.
And they all fell apart because, sure, they all did come from media that have a lot of lore, but except for Final Fantasy, they didn't have a lot of movie-style lore. They had a lot of game mechanic-style lore. And they didn't have the budget, they didn't have the time, and not enough people in the industry they were converting to cared.
Yeah.
Like, let's also think about it that way. How many video game teams care about just random movies coming in? Like, would you care if you were on a team? Okay, maybe you're going to say yes to this, actually. I was going to say, if you're on the team that was assigned to make a Morbius game, right? Like, you, okay, good, you wouldn't. Because that was like a meme online. I realized there was a meme joke there, but...
Are you saying that all of my interests are meme-related?
Yes. Yes, moving on.
Okay.
But also, how many people who do movies would care about Mortal Kombat? Until today, when Nintendo brought in one of the world's best animation studios to say, let's make a good Mario movie. And have you seen the new Mario movie? It's great. I loved it. I know it doesn't have a lot of lore, but in terms of animation, style, graphics, sound, and the little bit of lore they have, it is literally in my top 5 movies of all time.
Yeah, I think when you look at adapting something that has a fan base already to something else that you're hoping has a fan base independently, like, you have to know that that's going to be good. And like making
is there a fan base there to welcome you?
Like taking D&D, which lots of people love, really popular right now, and making a movie about it, that is a choice that could only happen now. If you had done that in the 90s, the only people who would go see it were like big nerds.
To be fair, in the 90s, they did make Baldur's Gate video games. Right? And they were not very successful.
Yeah.
Because
nobody's
no one cared.
Expecting them. No one wants them. Right?
Nobody
if you
was
want to play
their bulk house.
If you want to play D&D, you just go play D&D, right?
Yeah.
And I think Baldur's Gate 3 for me is a little bit like a nicotine patch of like, I don't have an active game right now, but Baldur's Gate 3 is D&D enough. Like, it's not pure D&D. It's not me sitting around improvising with my friends, but it has enough of the things that I kind of want for it to kind of count.
I am in shock at the line, Baldur's Gate 3 is like a nicotine patch.
It is. That's the best way that I can describe how this, like, it's not quite D&D.
You're right.
It's not like if you're going in being like, oh, this is D&D the video game. Not really. It is enough like D&D that if you understand D&D, you're gonna have a good time playing it because you understand the mechanics already and you don't have to learn how all the spells work and things.
Though there is also the level of you can't make a 100% freeform game in any way, right? You have to limit at some point because D&D is from the mind, and the mind can create beautiful things, but creating those things by hand requires time and effort that people don't have.
You just imagine writing if you had to follow what you had prepared for a D&D game as the DM, and you had to sit down and do like the decision tree of, okay, here's the prompt. Okay, if they do X, then Y. If they do X, then Y, right? And you had to map all of that out. It would be insane. Right?
It would be like making a D&D video game.
And that's what I'm saying is so Baldur's Gate 3 has gone, well, we can't have you do a million things, but you have these options. And we can get pretty close. Yeah.
And I think that's as good as it can possibly get as well for adapting. It is D&D the video game because the actual D&D the video game is mathematically impossible.
Yes.
Because you can't have every possible decision unless you make an AI-based video game, in which case that's going to be a mess.
Someone will do it.
It's coming. But not yet. But I think that does cover most things. Yeah. So for today's episode, we really want to talk about, Baldur's Gate. And I haven't played it, so this was kind of like your time to shine.
This was just me
this was your episode.
Talking about so many good things.
But also talking about converting from other media to video games is something that's difficult. And I think talking about a game that's done it so well and highlighting how it did it well is fundamentally important. And taking a little bit of time to, talk about Lego and card games and like movie tie-ins and shovelware and other trash things there as well.
Other trash.
Shovelware is trash. That's why it's shovelware. You're shoveling it into the dumpster pile.
Well, I would just say that Baldur's Gate 3 is the opposite.
It's successful. It did it right.
It's very successful at being what it is, right? The combat is a little bit bad, but it's because combat in D&D is kind of rough.
It is.
Right? So they've done the best to like iron out some of the kinks and like the sight lines don't work great sometimes. But
it's good. It's a good game still.
It's good at doing what it's supposed to do.
And that's exactly what it should be.
Yeah.
So that covers everything for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening today. Thank you so much, Vi, for preparing all of this for us today, doing so much work.
Yeah, I
sending it to me at 1 a.m.
so much Baldur's Gate to prep for this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
it's like homework.
Thank you all so much for listening. And that's everything. I've been Gaia.
And I've been Vi.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
And that's it for today's episode. But what if you wanted to listen to more? Well, our new episodes come out every Thursday at 9 p.m. Atlantic, and there are 3 different ways that you can listen. If you're in the Fredericton area of New Brunswick, Canada, you can listen live on CHSR 97.9 FM through any of your radio services. If you're not in this region or you prefer using the internet, you can tune in on chsrfm.ca at the same time, 9 p.m. Atlantic. As well, we release all of our episodes on a number of podcasting platforms online, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. So if you wanted to, you could go back right now and listen to Season 1, where Vi and I do a deep dive into the fundamental concepts of game design, rather than the hardware they'll be taking up this season. Anyways, thank you for listening, and have a good one.